The following is a segment from the Carl King Podcast. If you enjoy this show, be sure to like, subscribe, and send us burritos. We have one song review this week, and it is Saint Anger by Metallica, submitted by listener TMC3 in Florida. Now first, I want to talk about the things we can objectively measure about Saint Anger. This song was played by a DAW at 93 BPM, and that is according to my very accurate metronome. Now, I did some additional research on the internet, and some people claim that 93 BPM is the same as 92 BPM, or 95 BPM, or even 91 BPM. But I assure you, those BPMs are not the same BPMs. And it's why there are different numbers shown before the BPM part. And this might be a sort of flat earth situation, but we'll have to explore that with the real expert on tempos in a future episode. I also determined that this song is mostly in C minor, which is a good choice of key. There is a part that you could call an intro or interlude riff that has some chromatic notes around C. And that would be C, C sharp, D, and B flat. But the majority of the song, what might be called the verses and choruses, use a descending sequence of four notes: C, B flat, A flat, and G, which are totally diatonic to C minor. So far, so good. But the composition itself is far less interesting than both the history and the production, those being the context for the musical notes. So let's examine those. Back in 2001 or so, Metallica set out to record a new album, but James Hetfield was struggling with an addiction to alcohol. And that is a big deal. As a person who grew up in a family of alcoholics and now has a thing called PTSD from it, I know how much that will disrupt anyone's creative process. And multiply that by how much pressure was put on him from the band, the record label, the fans, so many expectations for him to live up to. So anything critical I say here, I say with my own understanding of that. Because this album was James Hetfield, the primary songwriter of the band, trying to relearn how to be creative, all while he was reprogramming his brain in the absence of a powerful substance. And it was all taking place in the moment, in front of the whole world. Now imagine the fear you would feel in that position. Now, after taking a year off for James to recover, and with the help of a career coach, Metallica decided to reinvent themselves and try something new. Well, why not? It had been 6 years, so let's see what comes out. Well, the result was an unexpected combination of things. Loosely tuned minor pentatonic nu metal guitars, unrelated song parts glued together with Pro Tools, and group-written free-form poetry lyrics. I'm only speculating, but to my ear, it sounds like they were listening to music on the radio at that time and trying to do their own version of that. And there are specific nu metal isms that creeped into Metallica's music. And one of those is the rhythm guitar style. Now, I have worked with a lot of guitarists, and I don't know why this is, but there is a thing that happens. If you hand any rock guitarist a guitar tuned to drop D, they will immediately play low, bluesy, flat fives and flat threes, and bending all over the place. All of their thrash chugging on the low E will entirely vanish from their vocabulary, and every riff will sound like grungy nu metal, basically like that Stone Temple Pilots song Dead and Bloated. And I believe this is exactly what happened to James Hetfield. There must have been someone that handed him a down-tuned guitar sometime after 1991, and that person is to blame for Load, Reload, and Saint Anger. And yes, I know James Hetfield detuned on Sad But True, but that still wasn't bluesy. The main point I want to make here is this. Tuning your guitar down has nothing to do with the harmonic or rhythmic content of the music. Consider that for centuries, pianos and even harps have notes many octaves below guitars, and that never forced anybody to play grungy blues scales on them. That low tuning and bluesy bending didn't go away, mostly, until Death Magnetic in 2008. And I'm thinking perhaps Rick Rubin told him to knock it off with the blues rock? Now, regarding the production of Saint Anger, there are a lot of technical problems. And you can only call them problems subjectively within the context of what you expect a Metallica production to be. Because if it were intentional and part of a style, it wouldn't be so much of a problem. And those problems are, most notably, hard digital cuts between sections of the songs. And by that, I mean instruments will suddenly become much louder or softer or cut out entirely, seemingly by accident. And this is something that in the recording world would be considered an error or a mistake. And those hard digital cuts cause abrupt changes in timbre, especially in the drums. For instance, during the double bass section at 44 seconds, the snare drum drops in level where before it was extremely prominent. And it disrupts that feeling of a band jamming in a garage, to quote producer Bob Rock. So I think he really achieved the opposite of what he was going for there. The whole song sounds patched together, and that's because it was. From watching Some Kind of Monster, the songs on this record weren't written as songs. So that metaphor of Frankenstein is actually a good one to describe their creative process on a micro level. As you can see in the documentary, they went into the live room, came up with a riff, and then kind of stapled it together in Pro Tools, listened to it a few times, and then went in to come up with another riff and attached it to the other one without much consideration of how well it fit. And then they might come back a few days or weeks later and glue something else in. And this causes basic songwriting problems as well. Like when the verse of Saint Anger comes in, it's got some pitchy singing and a syncopated drum beat that confuses whatever momentum they had built up in the previous minute or so. And at 1 minute and 48 seconds, they launch into another double bass segment in which a kick drum sample was inserted over the other kick drum track for very loud accents that make no sense in reality. From a drummer's point of view, it sounds synthetic and confusing because no one on earth could play double bass with 16th notes very quietly and then accent single notes like that. And that's another artifact of working in Pro Tools in such a cut and paste manner. You start cheating and doing things that you couldn't otherwise pull off. And the more you do that, the further you get away from a natural glue that holds the performance together. When the song returns back into that ringing snare drum section at 2 minutes 37, it's another abrupt jump and the snare changes tones. And 10 seconds later, there's a harsh edit where the cymbals abruptly cut off and the drum tone changes again. And the problem is it doesn't sound intentional. It sounds like someone moved the mics when they were cleaning the room and didn't put them back in the same spot. And there's not even any attempt at a crossfade. The cymbals just chop off. And by the way, about that whole Saint Anger snare tone thing, there was a guy named Matt Smith who recorded a parody of the Saint Anger snare sound by banging a pen on a metal office chair, and I think he mic'd it with an SM57. And there used to be a picture of it out there, but I can't find it now. However, the recording will be linked in the show notes. Anyway, at 3 minutes, they return to the verse again with that floppy drum beat. And the main problem, I think, is that this stop and start songwriting recording workflow screwed up the energy and flow of the music. I think they would have been better off workshopping the songs from a macro level, and I mean working on the song as a whole rather than writing the songs part by part, stream of consciousness day by day. because what they ended up with all of that cutting and pasting, is drums or vocals or guitars that aren't interacting with or matching the appropriate energy of the musical part. And the drums will have maybe the totally wrong feel against the vocals that are happening, and vice versa. Like they were recorded without hearing each other. And this happens all over the album. But at least, regarding the lyrics, Saint Anger does make an insightful observation about anger. Quote, "It's hard to see clear, is it me or is it fear? And it took me a long time to learn that anger is actually fear wearing a disguise." So thumbs up to whoever wrote that lyric. I'm guessing it was Bob Rock. All of these problems aside, I think that Metallica were brave to make Saint Anger, the entire album. And I give them major respect for it because think about it. How many bands in their position with that massive of an audience and status and cash cow would throw away their entire previous creative process? As we know, most would just keep making the same album forever and ever. So congratulations to Metallica for taking that creative chance. And thank you to TMC3 in Florida for submitting this song for examination. If you enjoyed this segment from the Carl King podcast, remember, you can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or through an old rubber hose.